Welcome to Drone Pilot MBA and Drone Business Insider.
Yeah, welcome everybody.
We are going to be diving deep
Deep.
into a very practical book today.
Very, very practical. All right, so you've got those drone skills. You can see the world in this amazing way from above, and the aerial photos are just incredible, right?
Yeah.
But the big question that I know so many people out there are thinking about is, how do you make money from that? How do you transform this passion that you have, this clear talent, into a real business?
Yeah. You're right. I think that's kind of the missing link for a lot of people.
Yeah.
You know, they might be fantastic drone pilots, they've got this artistic high, but how do you then turn that into something that generates income?
Absolutely. And that's exactly what we're going to dive into today. And specifically, we're talking to the drone enthusiast who's like, okay, I'm ready to launch an aerial photography business, but they're thinking, where do I even start on the business side of things?
Right.
So to help us navigate this, we've got a fantastic resource with us today. It's the book, Take Flight, Start a Drone Photography Business Under $1,000. And it's by Tony Marino, MBA.
Oh, yeah.
Now, what's really cool about Tony is that he's not just a business strategist, sitting in an office somewhere. He's an actual commercial drone pilot himself. So he really understands both sides of this equation.
Yeah, that's so important, I think. And what I really like about Marino's book is that it's really practical and it's very down to earth. And, he cuts through a lot of the theory and the jargon, which is really helpful for people who might not have that business background.
It is. And I think, our mission for this deep dive is to really pull out the most vital, most actionable business advice from Take Flight and give you listening a clear roadmap for getting your drone photography venture off the ground and doing it without, feeling like you need a business degree or a ton of money to invest, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So, okay, let's just set the stage here for a moment. Why should someone listening be excited about turning their drone photography into a business right now? What's the opportunity here?
Well, I think what's really interesting is that there are a few big trends all happening at the same time right now that make this a great time to be thinking about this. So the first one, as Marino really emphasizes, is just the accessibility of drones themselves.
Yeah.
They've become much more user-friendly. They're more affordable. So you don't necessarily need to break the bank to get a really good quality drone to get started.
Yeah, you don't need like a Hollywood level setup just to get professional results.
Absolutely. And then another thing that's happening is that the demand for this type of visual content, the aerial shots and the videos that drones can capture is just skyrocketing.
Yeah.
And it's happening across a lot of different sectors. Marino specifically mentions real estate tourism events. And think about it. It's true. How many times have you seen like a really high-end property listing that doesn't have those stunning aerial shots?
Right. It's like you can't even sell a high-end property these days without those views. It's an expectation.
Exactly. And the other thing that Marino highlights is that compared to, maybe starting a more traditional business, the barriers to entry in the drone services industry are actually relatively low. You can leverage the skills that you already have as a pilot, as a photographer, and you can really kind of build from there.
I love that. And it's not just limited to those really obvious applications, right? Like real estate photography. He also talks about the potential to specialize and really grow your business.
He does. And I think that's a really key question for anyone who's listening. To think about, what is it about aerial photography that really sparks your interest? Because, as you gain experience, you might find that you want to specialize in something like thermal imaging for inspections, or creating 3D maps for surveying and construction, or even looking at things like automated surveillance.
That's fascinating.
And these more niche areas can actually be really great because there's often less competition and you can potentially charge more for those specialized services.
It's not just about taking pretty pictures. There's a whole world of possibilities within this field.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, okay, let's say someone's on board with this. They see the potential, but the idea of actually like starting a business feels really daunting, especially if they don't have, a background in business.
Yeah.
And they're starting out with limited funds.
Yeah.
So what does Tony Marino suggest as those first foundational steps to help make this process less overwhelming?
Well, in chapter 2 of the book, he really emphasizes the importance of setting achievable goals right from the start.
Okay.
He doesn't specifically use the term SMART goals, but that's really the idea,
Yeah.
You need to think about what you want to achieve specifically. So, instead of just saying, I want to make money, maybe it's like, I want to book 3 real estate photography clients in the next 2 months, something very specific.
Yeah, that makes it feel so much more tangible.
Exactly. And it also helps you to measure your progress, because you can say, okay, did I achieve that goal? Yes or no?
Right.
And, are those goals achievable with the resources and skills that you currently have? And are they relevant to, the overall vision that you have for your business? And of course, you should always have some kind of time frame in mind.
So specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time bound. Okay, so you've got the goals in place. What's next?
So then he talks about defining your ideal client. Who is it that you're trying to serve?
Right.
And he uses the example of real estate agents or property developers. And by, being really clear about who your ideal client is, it helps you to focus your marketing efforts. And you can really tailor your message to speak directly to their needs.
So instead of just kind of taking a broad approach, you're really thinking about, okay, who are the specific people that I want to work with and how can I tailor my message to reach them?
Exactly.
I like that.
And then he also stresses the importance of setting revenue goals. So not just how many clients do you want to get, but how much money do you actually want to be making from your drone photography business?
Okay.
And he even gives an example of, aiming for $1,000 per month in revenue as a starting point.
That's really helpful because it puts things into perspective and it allows you to kind of work backwards and figure out, if I want to make this much, how many jobs do I need to book? What should my pricing be?
Exactly.
It makes it a lot less abstract.
And he also encourages you to think about, your long-term growth objectives. So where do you see your business going, in a year, 5 years down the line?
Okay.
Do you want to expand the types of services you offer? Do you want to, maybe upgrade your drone to a higher end model? Do you want to hire people to help you?
Right.
And thinking about those longer term goals can help you to make better decisions in the short term.
I love that. Okay, so now we've got, the goals. We know who we want to work with. We have some revenue targets in mind. Now comes that part that I think can feel really scary for people, especially when they're starting out on a tight budget, which is like, what are the actual expenses involved in starting this business?
Yeah, that's a big one.
What are the things that Tony Marino outlines as the key cost categories when you're trying to start a drone photography business?
Yeah.
For under $1,000.
So he basically breaks it down into 4 main areas. The first one being equipment, which is probably the most obvious one.
Yeah.
And he really recommends that, you focus on getting a quality entry-level drone for under $500.
Okay.
He even mentions some specific models like the DJI Mini 2 or the DJI Mini SE as being great starting points.
Those are really popular models and very capable.
Yeah. And the other thing he says is you need to factor in, essential accessories. So things like extra batteries, memory cards, which I think a lot of people forget about.
Absolutely, because those can add up.
Yeah, you're going to be shooting a lot of high-res photos and videos, so you need to have enough storage. And he estimates that, for those accessories, you're probably looking at around $100 to $150.
I think those extra batteries especially are like game changers. You don't want to be out on location and then your battery dies and you have to pack up early.
Exactly. And then he also talks about, do you have a laptop or a tablet that you can use for editing your work?
Right.
And if not, you might need to factor in another $100 to $200 to buy a, basic but functional device for that.
Okay, so that's the equipment side of things. What's next?
So then the second key expense category is licensing and insurance.
Right.
And he's very clear that if you want to do this professionally in the US, you absolutely need to get your FAA Part 107 certification.
That's not optional.
It's not optional at all. And he says the knowledge test for that typically costs around $175.
Okay.
And then he also talks about drone insurance,
right.
Because accidents can happen and you want to be protected. And he says annual premiums can range from, $200 to $500 a year. But he also suggests that on-demand insurance policies can be a good option if you're just starting out and you're not flying every day.
Yeah, because that can be more budget friendly in the beginning.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's licensing and insurance checked off. What's the third category?
So the third area is marketing.
All right, the fun part.
Yeah. And he really focuses on low-cost strategies. So he recommends that you set up a simple website.
Okay.
Which, these days you can get hosting and a domain name for probably under $100 a year.
It's amazing how affordable that is.
It really is. And then he also really emphasizes, using social media.
Yep.
So Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, showcasing your work, connecting with potential clients. And he even mentions that, business cards are still relevant.
Yeah. Never underestimate the power of a good business card.
Exactly. And you can usually get those printed for, $20 or something like that.
So you don't have to break the bank on fancy marketing to begin.
Not at all.
Okay, so we've covered equipment, we've covered licensing and insurance, we've covered marketing. What's the fourth category?
So the last one is operating costs. And these tend to be a bit lower, when you're just starting out, but you still need to think about things like transportation. So, fuel tolls, parking, especially if you're going to be traveling to different job sites.
Yeah, makes sense.
He also mentions cloud storage.
Right.
You're going to have all of these photos and videos, so you need to back them up somewhere securely. And, those services usually cost around $10 to $20 a month.
Makes sense.
And then any kind of software subscriptions that you might need as you grow your business.
Right. So it's all about being strategic and making sure that you're not overspending on things that you don't necessarily need in the beginning.
Yeah, exactly. Prioritize the essentials.
Okay. So now I want to talk about something that Marino brings up, which is putting together a business plan.
Okay.
Now, for someone who's never done that before, it can sound super intimidating, like, oh my gosh, I need to write a business plan.
I know it can be a little bit daunting.
Yeah. So what does he say about that?
So he really emphasizes that, when you're starting small, it doesn't need to be this huge formal document.
Okay, that's a relief.
Yeah. It's really more about having a framework to guide your actions. So he outlines some key components that you should consider, including, writing a brief executive summary that just kind of summarizes your business idea. Clearly defining the services that you're going to offer.
Right.
Doing some basic market analysis. So, understanding who your competitors are in your local area.
Yeah.
And then developing your pricing strategy.
Okay.
Outlining your marketing plan, and then also putting together some very simple financial projections. So, what do you think you're going to be earning and spending in your first year of operation?
I like that it's not about writing, this massive report. It's about just getting clear on the direction and understanding the key elements of your business.
Exactly.
And then on top of that, he also gives some really practical tips for, maximizing value when you're on a limited budget.
Right.
So, for example, he talks about, when it comes to equipment, prioritize quality over quantity. Don't try to buy everything all at once. Just get the essential pieces that you need to get started. He also encourages you to, learn basic marketing skills yourself instead of immediately outsourcing those tasks.
Yeah.
There are so many free resources available online.
Oh, yeah.
From tutorials to study guides. And he also really emphasizes the importance of networking.
Absolutely.
Getting out there in your community, building relationships with potential clients. That's so important.
And that's something you can do without spending any money at all.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the equipment itself. So chapter 3 of Take Flight focuses specifically on choosing the right drone when you're trying to stay under that $500 price point.
Yeah.
So what are some of the key considerations that he suggests for someone who's making that very first drone purchase for their business?
So one of the things that he really emphasizes is understanding what your specific service needs are going to be before you even start looking at different drone models.
Okay.
Because different types of aerial photography require different things,
Yeah, that makes sense.
For example, he says that, real estate photography usually requires high quality still images and smooth, stable video footage. Whereas if you're doing something like surveying or mapping, the priority might be more on GPS accuracy and the ability to capture very consistent overlapping images.
So the drone that you might use to film like a really cinematic shot of a wedding venue might not be the best choice if you're mainly doing like inspections or something like that.
Exactly. Yeah. So once you have a clearer picture of what types of services you want to offer, then you can start to narrow down your options.
Okay. So you know what services you're going to offer. What are the key features then that he says to look for in a budget-friendly drone?
So obviously camera quality is really important.
Right.
And he recommends aiming for a drone that has at least a 12 megapixel camera and the ability to shoot video in 2.7K or 4K resolution if possible.
Okay.
He also stresses the importance of battery life. How long can you actually fly that drone before you need to swap out the battery? Right.
Because you don't want to have to be constantly landing and recharging in the middle of a job.
Exactly. And most drones in that, under $500 price range are going to give you around 20 to 30 minutes of flight time per battery.
Okay.
Which again, highlights why it's so important to have those extra batteries.
Right.
And then finally, he talks about the importance of stability and good GPS features.
Okay.
So, having a drone that has GPS assisted flight makes it a lot easier and safer to control, especially if you're a newer pilot.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But it also enables things like, return to home functionality and a stable hover mode, which are essential for getting those professional looking shots and also just for minimizing the risk of losing your drone.
I love that he focuses on that because, it's really reassuring to know that even in that, under $500 price range, you can still find drones that have those essential features that are going to allow you to operate safely and professionally.
Absolutely. And I think, one of the big takeaways from his advice is that you don't always need the most expensive top of the line equipment to get started.
Right.
Especially when you're just starting out.
Especially when you're on a budget.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Focus on the drones that align with your business goals, and you can definitely get professional quality results, even with a budget-friendly drone.
That's really encouraging for people to hear. I think, all right, so you've got the drone.
Yeah.
What about all the other stuff that you're going to need? Chapter 4 goes into the essential equipment and accessories.
Yeah.
So beyond the drone, what does he say are those must-have items?
So apart from, those extra batteries, which we've already talked about, he also really emphasizes the importance of having enough memory cards. You don't want to run out of storage space in the middle of a job.
Right. It seems obvious, but it's easy to overlook.
Yeah. And then he also strongly recommends investing in a good quality drone backpack or carrying case, to protect your equipment when you're transporting it to different locations.
Yeah, because you're going to be taking that drone out to different places. You don't want to just be throwing it in the back of your car.
Exactly. And then he mentions a few other smaller accessories that can be really helpful. Like a sunshade for your controller screen.
Yeah.
Which can make a huge difference if you're flying in bright sunlight.
Makes it so much easier to see.
Yeah. And then he also talks about software.
Right.
And he points to some really great budget-friendly options like GIMP, which is a free alternative to Photoshop.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And then Canva also has a free version that you can use to create, basic marketing materials and social media graphics.
That's awesome.
So you don't necessarily need to pay for those expensive software subscriptions right away.
No. And then as your business grows, you can always upgrade later.
Exactly.
Okay. So that's really helpful. And then what about, on the safety side of things? Are there any accessories that he recommends for that?
Yeah, he actually suggests considering a GPS tracker.
Okay.
Like a TileMate, for example, which is a relatively inexpensive little device that you can attach to your drone.
And it just helps you locate it if it ever, goes down somewhere.
Exactly. It gives you that extra peace of mind, in case something happens.
That's a good tip. Okay. So we've covered the drone, the accessories now. Let's talk about the legal and regulatory side of things, which I know can feel very overwhelming for people.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Especially for new pilots. So what are some of the key things that Tony Marino covers in the book about this?
So he dedicates a whole chapter to explaining the importance of getting your FAA Part 107 certification, which is absolutely essential if you want to operate commercially in the U.S.
It's not optional.
Not at all. And he breaks down the process into a really clear step-by-step guide. So, first of all, he talks about the eligibility requirements. So you need to be at least 16 years old. You need to be able to read, speak, and understand English.
Right.
And you need to be in a physical and mental condition to safely operate a drone.
So those are pretty straightforward.
Yeah. And then the next big step is the knowledge test.
Right.
And he emphasizes that, this exam covers a lot of different topics.
Yeah, it's not just about flying the drone. There's a lot more to it.
Exactly. It's about airspace regulations. It's about weather. It's about the drone's performance characteristics, emergency procedures, all of those things.
Wow.
And so he really stresses that, you need to be prepared for this exam. It's 60 multiple choice questions. You need to get at least a 70% to pass.
That's a lot of information to study. Are there any resources that he recommends for people who are preparing for the test, especially on a budget?
Yeah, he specifically mentions the FAA's official study guide, which is available for free online.
Perfect.
So that's a great starting point.
Yeah.
And then he also points to a few different online training courses that are offered by, reputable organizations like Pilot Institute, Drone Pilot, Ground School, Remote Pilot 101.
Right.
And those are usually, relatively affordable compared to in-person classes.
So you don't necessarily have to spend, thousands of dollars to prepare for the test.
Not at all.
Okay, that's really good to know. And then once you've, studied and you feel ready, what happens next?
So then you need to actually schedule the exam.
Okay.
And you can do that through PSI, which is one of the FAA's approved testing providers.
Okay.
And the exam fee is usually around $175.
Right.
And then after you've passed the exam, the final step is to submit your application for the remote pilot certificate.
Okay.
And you do that through the FAA's IACRA system, which is their online portal for all of their aviation related applications.
So it's a pretty clear process once you know the steps.
Yeah, it's definitely manageable.
Okay, great. So you've got your Part 107 certificate. You're all legal.
Yeah.
What are some of the key operating rules that he emphasizes that people need to be aware of?
So he talks about a few really important ones, including, maintaining visual line of sight with your drone at all times,
Okay.
adhering to altitude limitations.
So there are specific limits on how high you can fly.
Yeah, you can't just go up as high as you want.
Right.
He also talks about the rule about not flying over people.
Okay.
So, you can't fly over people who aren't directly participating in your operation unless you have a specific waiver from the FAA.
Right. So if you're filming an event or something like that, you need to make sure that you're not putting anyone at risk.
Exactly. And then, of course, there are also the no-fly zone.
Certain areas where you're just not allowed to fly at all.
Yeah, and he recommends that you use the FAA's B4U FLY app.
Okay.
Which is a free app that you can use to check for any airspace restrictions in your area before you fly.
That's a really handy tool.
It is. And then he also briefly mentions that, you can apply for waivers.
Okay.
If you need to operate outside of those standard Part 107 limitations.
So, for example, if you need to fly at night or beyond visual line of sight.
Exactly.
But he says that's a whole other process.
Yeah, you need to be able to demonstrate to the FAA that you can do it safely.
Right. And then finally, he reminds everyone that it's also really important to be aware of any state and local regulations that might apply in your area.
Yes, because sometimes those can be even more restrictive than the federal rules.
So it's not just about getting the FAA certification. You need to stay up to date on all the rules and regulations.
Absolutely. And I think, operating safely and legally not only protects you and other people, but it also really helps to build trust with your clients.
Right, because they want to know that they're working with someone who's professional and who's taking all the necessary precautions.
Exactly.
Well, this has been such a fantastic deep dive into, the business side of starting a drone photography business.
Yeah, it's been really interesting.
We've covered so much ground today, drawing from Tony Marino's book, Take Flight, Start a Drone Photography Business Under $1,000. And I think, one of the big takeaways for me is that this is something that's achievable.
Oh, absolutely.
It's not a pipe dream. You can actually do this with careful planning, with smart choices about equipment, with a good understanding of the legal and regulatory side of things.
And I think, Marino's book does such a great job of making this whole process feel accessible and manageable.
Yes, even for people who don't have a business background.
Exactly.
So for all of you listening who are thinking about turning your passion for drone photography into a business, hopefully this deep dive is giving you a good foundation to start from.
Yeah. And, just as a final thought to leave you with, I would say really think about what it is about drone photography that excites you the most.
Yeah.
Is it the real estate side of things? Is it event coverage? Is it maybe something more technical like inspections or mapping? And then, start taking some concrete steps today, even if it's just doing some research on your local competitors or sketching out a list of services that you could potentially offer.
I love that. And remember, Tony Marino's book is a fantastic resource. And he also includes a lot of other really helpful resources in there.
He does.
From FAA regulations to equipment reviews to business development support. So there's a lot of information out there to help you.
Yeah. And what specific aspect of starting your business are you most curious about right now?
Yeah. What are you going to dive into next?
Take that curiosity and let it guide you.
That's a great way to put it. Thank you so much for joining us today.
It's been a pleasure.
And thank you all for listening. We'll see you next time.
Bye.